Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Sunday Project. I'm Deb, a gambling addiction therapist, and here working at Stop Betting Sports to provide you your weekly dose of motivation not to gamble on a Sunday. And I want to start by welcoming back Professor Dan Field. He is a adjunct professor at USC and a fine educator and clinician, and works with people and families who are struggling with gambling addiction. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Bob G, who never fails to bring a smile to all of our faces and is so passionate and motivated for the drive here to help people who are struggling with gambling harms. He's also a gambler in recovery himself and has how many years sober, Bob? Weeks and days?
Yeah, I'm mute.
Oh, Bob,
17 years, 17 years and 3 weeks.
there you go. There you go.
One day
And
at a time, one day at a time.
that's the one. And I'd like to welcome back Jared, and happy Father's Day, Jared, who is a ex-professional athlete and footballer, comedian, actor, and devoted father, gambler in recovery, who comes here every week to share his lived experience. And who have I missed? Have I missed someone? We have the Sage back, and I'm so pleased and happy to see you back here, Mark. We've missed you. Mr. Mark Levkowitz, who's created programs here in California, works directly on the shop floor with people who are struggling with gambling disorder, works with families, creates, as I said, creates programs, educates, clinicians. One of the best in the nation here, Mark. So we're so lucky and blessed to have you back, and we have our our guest back, Matt Zarb Cousins. He is a respected leader in gambling harm prevention and recovery space who created Gamban, which is an app that you can download on your phone, and I'll let Matt explain more about that later. And delighted to welcome Miss Kate Seslager. Have I said it right? Now, Seslager,
Nostalgia.
the Selger. Thank you, Kate. Kate, I just want to start by saying has joined us live from Canberra, Australia. It is 3 a.m. there, people. So, let's big up Kate right here. She is an
Yeah.
Kate works in the prevention space in Australia. She is an advocate for gambling harms. She is one of a kind. She is extremely fiercely devoted to educating people on the truth about the industry, and will tell us more about that in a second of the struggles that she's currently having with that in Australia. And I'm so grateful to you, Kate, to join us today and give us your insight and share, what you have to say. So everyone joining here today, if this is your first Sunday project, welcome. Thank you for joining. Happy Father's Day if you're a father. And this is not therapy, as you know, but we are clinicians. This is clinician led. We talk to you about what gambling disorder looks like, and we give you resources. And if you need any, they'll be in the chat today. We encourage you to ask questions. Please ask questions. We love the discussion. And so let's grab a coffee, settle in. So talking this week, like, why not talk about what's going on this week in the World Cup? No doubt we haven't seen how much has been wagered yet, exactly, but billions of dollars are likely being wagered globally on the World Cup currently. And so, gambling platforms and sports books are making a lot of money on that. And the headlines tend to focus on the money wager. But tonight we want to talk about the people behind those numbers and what the gambling industry are actually doing in terms of harms to the nation. And we've got someone in the room here from Australia, and we've got someone in the room here from the UK, and highlighting that this is a global crisis. So I just want to pivot to you, Kate. Have you share a bit about yourself and what you're currently doing and what you're seeing and feeling over there in Canberra.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is an incredible space. And as you said, it is a global public health crisis. Unfortunately, Australia is leading that in the worst way, meaning our population is the nation experiencing the highest levels of gambling harm in the world. And that is due to our relaxed regulation, the fact that we have unprecedented access to land-based gambling like poker machines, slots in the US, and fruit machines in the UK. Um, we have 200,000 in a very short space of landmass, and they are causing the bulk of the harm. But with the rise of online and sports betting, it's we have no protections around that, and that's where people like Matt come in to play, which is incredible. Um, I experienced gambling harm from age 18 to 32. I was, you know, taken to a club by my boyfriend, shown how to use a poker machine, had absolutely no idea that they were just as addictive as cocaine. Um, Quickly became addicted, and that's when self-loathing and shame set in. So I believed there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't use the product as it was intended. But when I realized it was, I am the exact customer that they are designed for. This is addiction by design. And when the person feels shame, that just fuels the behavior. So it's so, so important for people to understand this isn't something that you are. Human beings weren't built to be able to withstand a product of this design. You can, it, the way that it interacts with human beings, it's only been more refined over the last few decades. Um, they're now using AI. There's so much that is not available to the person experiencing gambling for them to understand what is happening, the speed at which it's happening, the way it's now being marketed through influencers and things like that, that it normalizes it. Again, it makes an environment that is completely unbalanced for people to walk in, assume because of the access that it's a safe environment when it isn't. And that interaction then, as I said, can fuel quick losses that lead to a person hating themselves instead of understanding that they are being groomed for addiction by a product built to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really well put. And what was it that that really was the line for you that made you go into this work?
Oh, um, well, I had put my hand up for help during the 15 years that I had experienced gambling harm, and nobody actually met me with any truth of what was happening. It was all just, why can't you stop? Set these limits, do this, do that. Don't you know the odds are so bad? It just makes the person feel, you already feel completely overwhelmed with why you can't engage in a way that makes sense to you. And so it led me to hopelessness. It led me to believe I was the problem. And in 2012, I almost took my life. And when I went to a counselor the morning after, um, she just said to me, not how much have you lost or why can't you stop? She just said to me, what do you like about you? And that just absolutely floored me because she could see how destroyed my self-esteem had become over those 15 years. And she helped me to start to rebuild me. And when I realized that my self-esteem had been destroyed when I was 18, um, that led me to think, hold on, if I don't know me, what else don't I know here? What else don't I know about this environment? And it sparked curiosity for me to learn about this industry and learn about the fact that I wasn't the only Australian experiencing gambling harm, that it had been happening for decades. Poker machines had been accessible in my state since the 50s. So that was 30 years before I was born. And um, harms had been intergenerational at that point. So I was like, hold on, this is not okay that this is able to happen. You shouldn't be able to pour over $6,000 in a half an hour into a machine that's meant to be just harmless fun. You can't have it both ways. You can't advertise it as purely entertainment and yet it be completely exploiting human beings at a rapid rate. So, yeah, I began being an advocate for gambling reform and working to help others make sense of the environment and, try and change the environment, try and change the gambling landscape. I haven't been a prohibitionist. About putting in consumer safeguards. It's about helping people to not be lambs to the slaughter, which is the current environment, at least that Australia faces. And when I look globally at what is happening in other countries, um, we've let an industry lead in technologies and access to human beings without it keeping pace with safeguards and consumer protections.
Yeah, Matt, I want to bring you in here because you had a very similar experience to Kate with, gambling, and then it changed your life and made you, do what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I think it was similar in the sense that what obviously no one can uh, recover from a gambling addiction for you. You have to take responsibility for it, and it's a very lonely place. I think, if you're trying to quit gambling, that's why, what you're doing with this project is really important because it connects people who are going through the same thing, and you do feel very lonely, and it's very isolating by its nature to think that you're the only one going through it. And is there something wrong with you? And I think the whole narrative about responsible gambling, it does tend to locate the blame for people getting addicted within the individual, within the person who has become addicted, even though the industry does everything it possibly can to get you addicted, to actually get products that are more addictive regulated or legalized, to encourage you to engage more with their platforms. So actually, on the one hand, you've got a sector that claims to want people to gamble responsibly, and on the other hand, they're doing everything possible to get you to do the opposite. So it was only really once I was sort of a couple of years into having quit gambling on fixed odds betting terminals, which were obviously the roulette machines in England in the betting shops. We used to be able to bet £100 a spin. That the penny kind of dropped for me, and I thought, well, these machines are £100 every 20 seconds on roulette, which is a very addictive game. They were called the crack cocaine of gambling, and it's like, well, this is they're making so much money from this product. Clearly, they know it's addictive, and it kind of made me investigate that a bit more, interrogate that a bit more, and then started to think, well, better regulations in place, if there were better controls in place, could it have stopped me getting addicted at 16? Could it have at least reduced the level of harm I experienced? Um, but I think anyone who wants to quit gambling, I think it really, really helps to understand that this was a process that has happened to them, as well as like something, whether people are more predisposed or less predisposed to gambling addiction. Ultimately, the gambling industry wants people to engage more with their products and with their platforms, and in so doing, they create the environment for addiction, and that's unfortunately the business model.
Yeah, the way if I could say something, the way our brains work is we don't know who's going to gamble responsibly. They could say it all the time. There are so many factors that I brought up. It could be genetics. In my case, I think it was genetics. First time I gambled, that was it. Whereas it been my whole life, or a big win, or a big loss, or probably the worst is to solve a mood disorder of some sort, just to make you feel better. I've spoken to so many clients over the years, and gambling works better than any psychotropic drug. It's better than Lexapro or whatever. Unfortunately, we don't hear about the side effects like we do on all those drug commercials. And just what you guys are saying, they're leading in. Unfortunately, we're trying to treat the symptoms. I was talking before with somebody. There seems to be a big disconnect in our country with the problems and then who's causing the problems. Like we're reading stories after stories in the newspaper about gambling scandals. And I read every one of those things and I'm waiting to see, oh, and this is what DraftKings or FanDuel said. And there's nothing about it. It just talks about the problem. And there's such a tremendous disconnect because I think in our country, I don't know if it's the same with you. I know in the UK, you guys got ahead of it because you've been doing it so long and we're able to get ahead of it. But for us, the gambling is way going in front of any kind of political discourse. We're so far behind in what's going on right now, despite all the harm that we're reading about.
The greatest illusion is the term responsible gaming. There's no such thing as responsible gaming. They're creating an illusion that if you gamble responsibly, well, you're going to win. No, if you're gambling responsibly, it means you're just going to lose less. That's the bottom line. There's no such thing as responsible gaming, in my opinion. And welcome from down under. Who knew that we were describing people's bank accounts when we said down under?
Yes, it is. It's a lie, and it's a playbook of a predatory industry to use that term responsible gambling so that you put all of the responsibility on the person engaging, whereas in some European countries now, that responsibility sits with the operators, and if they don't um, provide their product responsibly, they are held accountable. And that, I think, is the landscape that we need to adopt globally. Is the responsibility has to sit with those that provide the product, that they have made consumer safety and not so predatory, and that's not the case at the moment for many, many countries who are experiencing gambling harm.
Do you think, clearly we all come from different countries and we all are fighting the same problem. And as I think gambling's been around for a long time and countries have had different ways of introducing it. But right now, it's the rise of technology that's adding to this thing. So, like responsible gaming, like in a casino, I remember my mom, she would come home and lose her money, but she would have that time to break to go try to get more money or the bank would stop her. But these days with apps, they can just pour, pour, pour into you that it's just one of those things where there's no fail stops. And that's something that we're fighting as a world. Like everybody, the technology. I just saw one of my friends tell me they have an AI on the FanDuel app now where you can literally talk to about who is this table tennis player. And it's like this technology is rising to people to make more addicted. And so it makes it harder to do responsible gaming, which isn't real. You're right, Bob.
And it's so
Yeah.
accessible to just get back onto the app and to get back into action. And when you're feeling low, as you were describing, Kate, the shame involved in a spiral of gambling, you're going to be very quick to just try to escape those feelings by getting back on the app. And that's why it's really hard for the individual to go out and seek help, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And as you said, it's sometimes not even the individual that's wanting to escape those feelings. It's the industry peppering them with offers and bonuses and this and that, so even if the consumer's intent is to stop or limit or whatever, they're being absolutely bombarded with as I said, a predatory industry, knowing exactly how to manipulate behavior and accelerate gambling. So it's not a fair fight in its current format, and that's what drives me because it's when if as soon as the person thinks I have to get this under control, or it's my responsibility, or it's just even just if a person has it's just a bit of fun, the industry's already won. The industry because you haven't perceived the threat that is there. Does that make sense?
It
Absolutely.
absolutely does. I think there's a not knowing of the threat when you go onto a site and when you start generating dopamine through being in action, whether it's iGaming or sports betting or whatever. It's highly addicting, and as you say, it's addiction by design, and it just feeds on itself. And before you know it, the chasing cycle sets in, and it's incredibly difficult to address it on your own, and you feel bad because you're tasked to quote unquote gamble responsibly.
Mm.
I just want to go to something sort of that Matt said and why sports betting is so different. He talked about use the term crack cocaine. Like in the early days, the first crack cocaine that we of gambling was video poker. And what made it crack cocaine was for the first time, and like slot machines were like pinball machines without flippers. You had no control, just let the ball go down and whatever happens. But now with video poker, you're able to pick cards, and now people have action in the game of their own. Sports betting is that if that's on crack, I don't know what sports betting is on,
Mm.
because the thought that you can win, the statistics that are constantly going on the screen during the games, promoting it, having the announcers, it drives me crazy. Every time I'm done with them, or the video influencers like now John Hamm is all of a sudden the big person in this country, and we just see it growing and growing. And now here's where the bigger problem is going to be is prediction markets, and especially what, we talked about getting somebody, Deb talked about getting funding for states and whatnot. Now DraftKings has become a prediction market instead of a gambling site, and it's
Mm.
not considered gambling. And all the states that put regulations in, all the states that were getting money, which a little bit might have trickled down to helping the problem gambler. Now the states get nothing. And a state
Mm.
like Utah, who is vehemently against gambling, now you could bet live on sports through DraftKings. And DraftKings is really proud to announce, I don't know if anybody's seen the commercial, available in all 50 states.
Oh.
And it usurps the entire process. It takes it so we're getting further away
Mm.
from being to help. And once the other companies go into prediction markets, then the states will be barely getting anything, eliminating a lot of the free treatment program. Most states have free treatment. That stuff's going to start, that money's going to dry up.
The industry has zero interest in responsible gaming. They put that up to appease us, people that are on our side of the fence. There's no such thing as responsible gaming. They wouldn't make money if people gambled responsibly, or they wouldn't make as much money. So they're focused on those of us who can't control it. And the whole 1-800-GAMBLER, it was just okay, let's post this. But they're not interested in people gambling responsible. They'd be out of business if people gambled responsibly.
Yeah. The reality is, if you have a sportsbook account and you start to actually win, they'll slow down your account or cancel it because you're of no interest to them. They only pursue people that are losing, and they go all in on those people and uh, offer them bonuses and make them VIPs and make them feel important and exploit our need for human connection in a very despicable way. Um, they called rooms where poker machines are in Australia VIP rooms. Um, it's so horrific when you realize that it's just exploitative, and to use our need for human connection to make somebody feel like they're being valued and important to an organization or an individual, because often these VIP managers are a personal relationship that you have with the gambling company, with somebody who's assigned to manage you. In Australia, sometimes they use retired sports people. So they, or celebrities, that's something that's just changing in our legislation here. We're hoping to ban the relationship of celebrities and influencers promoting gambling, which isn't the case in the US at the moment, which is it's so bad and I see regularly people on social media being offered massive money to market gambling to their followers and them saying, I said no to this paycheck. It would have been really crazy, life-changing money for me, but I'm saying no to this because I don't want to promote gambling to my followers. I don't want this money. And so we are seeing a tide change in the global market as far as people waking up to the reality of the harm that is causing. I mean, that money isn't handed out by gambling companies because they're good people. It's come from the harm of others. And like in casinos, those big jackpot amounts of money that are up there, it's bait that's been reclaimed from the lives destroyed of other people. It's an illusion of hope that is sold to people, dangled because of cost of living crisis, because of all the other things in our a society that have broken down and we've accepted as normal environments. And I think I was just at an addiction conference here in Australia, and um, the opposite of addiction is connection. What's his name?
Johan Ari.
Johan.
Yeah.
He spoke at it, and he talks about Rat Park, and I'm
Mm.
like, we are living in a Timu rat park. Like we have this an illusion of we live in Rat Park and we shouldn't be drinking the cocaine water like the rats in his experiment, or the one that he cites in his talk. uh, you know, but we have all of the, as I said, it looks like we should be living in a society that doesn't need these things, but we the control of behavior is unprecedented. Like we're being nudged to consume, to um, normalize and accept broken environments that um,
Yeah.
have a facade of, being about connection or being about
Yeah.
well-being.
I think that's definitely what they do, and like they exploit. I think that what they've started to do now with some of their marketing is exploit the kind of nihilism and despondency of younger people. So young men in particular who are constantly told and reinforced, like with the message that they're never going to get um, a house, they're never going to be able to buy their own house, they're never going to be able to kind of get a job because of AI. They just constantly get like these messages are constantly like, in the algorithms of young men. And along comes the gambling industry to say, oh, well, I'll tell you what is fair, a roll of the dice, right? So it's kind of like framing it as if like that's a way out of the problems of like society. There's the structural problems. And I think one of the real difficult things to reconcile from my perspective is a lot of these societal problems and structural problems are a result of the failure of government policy more broadly, right? And that's over 20, 30 years. And governments now have embraced and liberalized gambling. And our government in the UK wants to grow the gambling industry. The gambling minister appeared at a House of Lords inquiry last week or earlier this week, and said that the government policy is want to grow the gambling industry, grow the gambling industry. Now, what does that mean in practice? It means getting more people to gamble, and getting more people to lose more money gambling. And that money doesn't come from nowhere. That money comes from other parts of the economy, right? So, or people getting into debt, or, and you think, well, knowing what we know about the gambling industry, is it responsible on part of the government to want to grow that sector? That doesn't mean we want to ban it. It doesn't mean we want to stop people being able to do it if they want to in a safe environment. But that's very, very different from growing the industry, getting more people to do it. And there was a study I saw earlier today, actually, in the US, and the conclusion was that one of the sectors that has actually suffered as a result of the expansion of sports betting are restaurants, and in particular pizza restaurants, because when people are watching sports, the money that they would otherwise be spending on pizza or takeaway is going on to sports betting. So, as I said, the money comes from somewhere. And if you're trying to grow the gambling industry, you're doing that at the expense of all of these other sectors, which actually are more productive and, not as harmful.
Yeah. It's actually, I think, a little bit rooted in like even in capitalism. I feel like they're not caring about the losers. They're, try to tell people be a winner. We're going to focus on being a winner. And meanwhile, the losers are us common people, which is everybody. And I mean, I don't want to step on Mark's story, but I just thought something that was crazy. Uh, this last Sunday, they had the UFC fight at the White House, and the head commentator got tweeted out a DM showing that the Eric Trump was literally like, who's the fixed fight? Who's the person that's fixed? And they deleted it and obviously smear. But I'm like, they're normalizing gambling. Like anytime you watch a sport, you should have money on it. And this is something that's coming from a political stage where like, it's not, hey, how do we control this? It's like, why aren't you in on it? And I think that's just scary.
You
Well,
mentioned this, the government, the state lotteries, where this kind of all began, where you have an opinion on sports, you have no opinion on a lottery ticket, and that's considered state-sponsored terrorism. The governments take all of the profits out of a lottery system, and people are doing there's no opinions. Give me five tickets.
the languaging also now unfortunately is making it worse in terms of changing. Like Robert uses that responsible gaming, which I die every time I hear it turned into the word gaming. But now it's investing, which is even crazier with the prediction markets. The reason why they can get away with everything is it's not gambling, and it is everybody knows that it's gambling. And the scariest thing is sort of, what I'm hearing is the difference in this country between sports betting and casino gambling. Like casino gambling is very obvious. I work with a lot of clients. Every one of my casino gamblers know in their head that what they still think they could beat it, but the odds are against them. But they still think in their head, and that's why we're dealing with a disease here, of people thinking they could beat something that's and they do. And it's amazing when you're working with gamblers of hearing that story after and after. But sport, and comps, about the comps, right? If you're a good player, you get a buffet ticket, or if you're really good, you get a room, or if you're a whale, they're going to take you by plane. But the same thing is happening with sports betting, and we're not seeing any of it. It all goes underground. Nobody understands where the comps are, that people are getting comps. I have had two clients over the years that were given free rides to the Super Bowl with tickets, plane rides, picking them up, which I would have never even known. And I try to tell my clients, the bigger the comp, the more money you're losing, because they ain't losing on you. And now, a lot of some of the states are taking money from DraftKings and BetMGM, and I'm not sure about BetMGM, but FanDuel, and they don't realize it's a comp also. They're using the money. Oh, yeah, we got all this great money. Now we could do this, we could do that, but they're comps. And the only thing that, sort of what I was going to read a story. Let me just read a paragraph of one of the stories that I was going to get into. One of the biggest concerns is financial harm. Recent studies have linked expanded sports betting access, higher credit card debt, lower savings rate, and declining credit scores, and increased bankruptcy filings. New research released this month suggests that sports betting losses may be contributed to household, and I know this from working with clients and their families, household instability, with some families cutting back on necessities, even as much as food. The money's got to go
Mm.
somewhere, and the money is not going anywhere. It's sort of what Matt was saying. Like when you buy something, that money keeps getting recycled. I don't know where this money is going. So overall, it's generally going to affect the economy.
Mm.
It's not the,
There was a brilliant study in the UK by the University of Cambridge, University of Oxford, and it used data from one of the big banks, Lloyds Bank, and it analysed 6.5 million bank customers' data over 7 years. And I just want to read some of the findings out because it just really does kind of reinforce what Mark was saying. So they found that the top 1% of gamblers spent 58% of their income on gambling. Some of these will be of no surprise to you, but some of them are actually quite shocking. The heaviest gamblers had a 37% increase in mortality rates compared to non-gamblers. Higher rates of future unemployment and physical disability, lower spend on self-care, fitness, education, and hobbies, increased nighttime wakefulness linked to poor mental health, lower rates of financial planning, lower likelihood of holding a savings account, standard credit products, higher rates of missing mortgages, credit card loan repayments, reliance on payday loans, all the things that you would expect there. But what was really super interesting for me was the rapid escalation. So it's described as a highly sticky behavior. So 6.9% of heavy gamblers went from not gambling at all to heavy gambling in 6 months. So I think it's the nature of online gambling and sports betting and app-based smartphone gambling is how quickly people can descend now into addiction. It's not like going to a sports book where you would have, a certain number, a finite number of events, betting events every time you went. It's now just completely 24/7 and there's other products and there's cross promotion. And so just how quickly people can descend into addiction, I think is definitely a feature of where we are.
Yeah, when I
Mm.
when I got into my 12-step program in the early 80s, I would say the average person, it took them 20 years before they would get into the program. Now it's like under a year, usually somewhere between 6 months and a year. How quickly, because it's also how quickly we have now access to money. It's much
Mm.
easier to get money. I'm really surprised that you said 58%. In my case, it was 110% of my income went to gambling.
Do you think that the rise of like live betting is one of those things that like helped that? Because I feel like, I mean, I remember back when I would go to Vegas and you wait in the line and you put a bet in, but now the fact that there's 1,000 bets on everything from the coin flip to is this going to be a run play to the odds have changed how many yards this guy gets, all of that is feeding to, I think if you put $1 on 100 different bets, it's probably more likely to make you addicted to gambling because you're looking at so many things that happen than to put $100 on one bet. And so I think that maybe just the amount of sheer being able to gamble on things contributes to that compulsiveness.
Yeah, part of the addiction is deciding what to bet on, putting the money in and then waiting for the result. So if that's happening in, very close succession, then it's just like a slot machine where it's hitting. It's not just waiting for a money line or something at the end of the game. It's just like it's constant action, so it's harder to
Mm.
pull away from it. So it is more addicting, by design. And yeah, I agree. It's super quick and easy to develop a gambling addiction and very hard to get out of it. I think that, people will get captivated, they'll get sucked in, and even in the course of, a few gambling episodes, they'll catch the fever, and then it's on. And the phone's in the pocket, the casino is right there. It's accessible. And now with live betting, it's like a slot machine. And it's brutal how quickly and how severe, young people especially can get pulled into a gambling addiction.
I was just
Mm.
Free
thinking earlier,
play.
Dan, when Kate was sharing about her experience, about her self-esteem, and how we work with people all the time who just have their self-esteem through the floor, like it's just been destroyed because you're sucked in and you're then you when you're when you get to a point where you've destroyed part of your life and your finances and hurt people because you've lied, or the shame that goes with it. So I was wondering what you were thinking as Kate was sharing about that earlier on.
Well, it's usually at a really low point where you feel shame and a huge hit to your self-esteem that you finally are, going to go and get some help. And it's just a necessary part of getting better is to tell a counselor or a trusted person, the extent of what you did while you were in your gambling addiction. And when you do that, the burden is lifted a little bit. Those first sessions with a good counselor can be incredibly relieving, and those are the necessary steps to get well. And over time, and even within a few days, you're going to start to feel better about yourself. The shame will be lifted as you're not gambling. Every day you're working and you're not gambling is a financial net positive. And then you're talking to other people about the gambling problem. You see that you're not alone. You see that it's a predatory industry, that thousands, millions of people are developing a gambling addiction, and that you're bolstering one another up and getting over it. But it really is hard to walk into the GA meeting for the first time or to call 1-800-GAMBLER and actually follow through and go into that first appointment. But I mean, Jared is a testament to the fact that when you do that, you start feeling better and your life does get better.
What really I enjoyed about when you first started talking, Kate, is with a big change in the way we do treatment, especially for addicts, is focusing in on the strengths. In the old days, it was consequences, consequences, what's going to happen if you relapse. And to me, those are very traumatic ways of looking at it. But she focused on your strengths. And that's what brought you here to this meeting today. This gambling, unfortunately, is uncurable. And that's the scary part. That's the part I hate the most, is once you cross that line, you're not going to go back. If you have a problem, you could solve a problem. If you have an addiction, you just have to treat the addiction. And, based on it being around for forever, it's very treatable if you work with the good. I'm the firm believer of the trinity of a really good gambling therapist that understands gambling, going to a 12-step program, and family involvement. And I see families, I've been gone over 40 years. I see so many families been able to make complete changes and have even better lives because of being grateful every day. It's been a long time. I'm still grateful when I do my laundry. I never did my laundry when I was gambling, the cleanest, dirty shirt. But how uplifting that treatment can be, even sometimes to make us the person who we really are, and then be able to share, as Dan said, especially in meetings and other places or groups, to be able to share that with others and be an example, be the person who was there for you when you came in.
Focus on self-worth, not net worth.
I
Kate,
think
what you were saying was that gambling sort of mimics connection and mimics community. What I've seen in treating gambling addiction is that we're nurturing genuine community, in the groups, and actually, creating a bond among group members that is, just really healing and beneficial both for the groups and the group facilitators when it's really clicking and really at its best.
Yeah,
Jared, what's your experience been with gambling recovery groups and healing?
as Kate said, and Dev even put in the chat, I think the opposite of addiction is connection. I think the fact that I have group in my community and the fact of recovery is honestly one of the strongest things. As you guys were saying, I just remember when and I'm relatively, I mean, I'm only 4 months in sober. I mean, I've been relapsing a lot throughout life because of sports and the people I have around me. But the truth of it is like not used to sports, but I had so much negative self-talk. Like I would literally talk to myself, "You're so stupid. How? You can't believe this. Oh my fucking," and all these things. And I think now that I'm getting further and further away from it, it's more positive self-talk, and it's more, you got this, everything's gonna be fine, you got this. And I think as that builds up, it kind of builds the self-esteem again, because you do, like, I mean, I've had a lot of accomplishments in my life, and at points in gambling, I'm like, I'm the worst person in the world, and it gets to that point. So I do think this community, and Dan has been a godsend to me. I feel like he's been just the sweetest person in the sense of not judging me, even though I'm in my own head, and then creating this space where now, like, SBS is my backbone. It's one of those things where I look forward to coming on here and seeing everybody kind of have it. So it's just that community is what helps. And I hope more people, because I am around people now and I can see more of, like, oh, maybe you're not a mini, but that's strong, looks like gambling addiction. And I can't wait for those people to find these spaces so that everybody gets a little healthier. Because if they were anything like I was, it's a bad place to be alone.
Mm. Uh, uh, well done. I'm so impressed with how you've noticed that we beat ourselves up, if we're talking about ourselves in a really harmful way. And that's something that gets kind of trained into us when we're trying to make sense of this environment that we think on one hand we're supposed to be able to control, but once we're in that environment, we can't. And that relationship to ourselves just gets disrupted in a really damaging way. So being kind to yourself, it's the first thing I tell, people that reach out is this has happened to you. It's not who you are. You are a human being. We're all fallible. There's no perfect person. But what people don't understand is this is the exact intent of this industry, that this is happening to you. That's how they're making their money. Whereas when you first engaged with gambling, did you ever imagine that this could happen to your life? No, not in the slightest. Most people that I encounter, oh, I was at a friend's wedding and there were poker machines there and people went over and started putting money in, or we went after work with a colleague, or my nana introduced me. However it is, you don't see it coming. It's not something you ever think is going to be part of your life. And but that hijack is absolutely, built in to the product. And with certainty, they know how to manipulate human beings. And whether or not you engage with it in a small amount or a large amount is irrelevant. If you're somewhere on the spectrum of gambling harm, whether you've lost $5 or 5 million, they know how to nudge people along. And sometimes it's just about whether or not you have access to it or you don't.
And I
Or for some people,
just want to raise a point as well that from earlier, that was news to me, Matt, about the sector, like pizza. Like, people aren't spending money on pizza. That's all, that's a piece of what we know. What else aren't people spending money on because the money's going on gambling? We're talking about, what percentage of kids now are gambling? Yeah, 70% of kids, and they haven't fully developed yet. So it's just like normalizing, this is what you do with money, right? The value of this is what you should be doing with your money. We're hearing that now that retirement funds, our current generation of youth won't have a retirement fund potentially because of what they're doing with their money right now. You know, a decade of being in $100,000 of debt when you're 27 years old is what we're looking at as clinicians, right? Working with these kids. Yeah. So what else aren't people spending their money on? What else isn't money going on? And where is it going? It's
Well,
going
a
to
lot
the
of them are
government.
accessing credit and predatory loans, and there's, they're not really feeling the consequences until all lines of credit have been, utilized. And so then it often comes, to the parents or the family members that are then saddled with, the shock of that their son or daughter has a gambling addiction coupled with, a bill of, thousands of dollars. And then the person is kind of thrust into treatment at times with this, onus, this cloud of everything that's occurred financially in the last months, and then the disclosure. And I want to say to, those people that despite all that stress and tension around money, is that treatment can work even under these tense circumstances, even if you're not ready or you're kind of forced into it. To be willing to really look at changing that behavior. But it's often some really tense situations that get people into counseling and into GA in the first place.
In the 12 steps, there's a question about did gambling cause you to have difficulty spending money for normal things because you'd rather gamble? Like should I go to the dentist or should I go to the racetrack? Those are the kind of decisions. And, once again, they have a master's degree in vulnerability, human vulnerability, and they should change free play into please stay.
You
Is it
know,
also? Oh, go
go
ahead.
go go ahead, Jared.
I think it's weird that, like, because obviously, like, when you're in the gambling phase, you'll go use credit and, loans and borrow money from people. And then you win this money back, and it's not like, oh, pay back my bills and get myself stable. It's like, oh, splurge, just go spend this money stupidly because there's gonna be much more coming. And now you're, you're like, wow, I have this nice $300 t-shirt and I still owe, $1,500 to the credit company.
Yeah, no, and that's our drug. Our drug is the money, and it's insatiable. Like, you can only do so much. I always ask, I still work sometimes with substance abuse clients, and I ask, what's the most money you ever spent in one day on using, maybe $2,000 or something. There's a limit to how much you could do, but with gambling, plus the fact I always ask, somebody doesn't do heroin to solve a financial problem, but it's the gambling that we always think in the back of our mind for whatever reason. I mean, we're addicted and it's in our brain, but not the thinking part of our brain, the survival part of the brain keeps finding excuses of why, what, today is going to be different. You only have $300 to pay your mortgage and it's $2,000. How else could you possibly do it unless you gamble? And then you end up, borrowing money and losing the 300 and more money. People don't come into treatment generally until they're broke. That's why a lot of the treatment services are free for gambling. But I think that's starting to dry up. Again, as states lose funding for gambling, we're going to start seeing that free treatment dry up. I know even some of the big vendors that were offering free treatment are cutting back on their free treatment of what they're doing. A lot of it is about money, but going back to a couple of things. One about connection. The last three gambling commercials I've seen are all in bars, where everybody's together and everybody's cheering together, creating that connection. And my favorite one is a new one where the guy's telling his gambling story at the bar and how much money, and all of a sudden he had this big win and goes, food for everybody, of you could be the life of the party, and it's really scary. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is, how sort of what I was talking about before, how inviting treatment is. Gamblers are really tough. I keep saying I'm quitting. I want to go back, work with drug addicts and alcoholics. They're easier because especially sports bettors, they still think they could win no matter what. It's very difficult. The relapse rate, unless they can get into, I think one of the most successful things that I know is in Gamblers Anonymous, a lot of big areas are having beginners meetings. And those beginners meetings seem to be extremely helpful when you're in a room with, like when I came in to a 12-step program, like I was 20 years younger than anybody else. But now we're getting all those young people, they identify with each other. And it seems to be a really big help to be able to make a connection with somebody your age outside of the group. Because gamblers, when we're talking about this low self-esteem, gamblers in treatment, like I'm going to switch back to being a sponsor because I sponsor a lot of people. And nobody ever thinks they're doing enough in early treatment. I'm not doing this. I'm not working my steps. I didn't finish all the steps or whatever. Did I do that? Am I going to enough meetings? And I think it's our job. I know all of you here, except for now I'm learning about Kate, is for us to be the cheerleaders, for us to be that person that says you're not alone. And the same thing to families. connect them with families, you know. Most of my calls come from parents. First thing I do is send them to somebody from Gamina to tell them they're not alone. The next time I talk to them on their phone, it's like talking to a different person.
Mm.
You know, it's, you know, I tell my clients usually, because I've been around so long between 12-step and treatment, I've probably seen more people get better than anybody. This thing is treatable. You just have to work a little harder, you know, and the payoff, you want to talk about a great payoff of being grateful that the rest of your life that you're not gambling. I mean, you know, priceless.
So many thoughts, Mark. I'd like to have a Sunday project based around understanding treatment and treatment options, and I'd like to pivot the conversation now on what are we doing about it. You know, we've got in the room here, Kate. If you've just joined, Kate is an advocate in Canberra, Australia. It is about coming up to 4 a.m. over there. This is dedication for you, right? And we've got Matt Cousin from the UK who created Gamban, the app that you can download on your phone. I've just put the resources in the chat. We do have resources on the bottom of the webinar every week, but you have to click on it to see what we do. We have there. But yeah, what are we doing about the race that we're in right now and the fight that we have, the real fight that's so important that we stick together and keep pushing forward. As some of you might not know, you know, we're volunteers. We aren't funded by the gambling industry. There are the people that are directly funded by the gambling industry that work in areas like responsible gaming. So for those of you who don't understand what that is, I'll let someone else explain it. But responsible gaming, you know, are an organized by the government and paid for and funded by the gambling industry to present that we are doing something to prevent harm. And what is happening and being presented isn't preventing harm. You know, tiny little thing written on the bottom of a screen, you know, gamble responsibly isn't doing the job. And we are, as Mark, you just said, I see a lot of people recover. You've expressed on the Sunday Project as well that you've also seen people die. And I know that that's hard for people to hear on a Sunday morning, but we know this is the truth of, as Kate shared, she wanted to take her life. She almost did. We've had people share that directly with us. This thing is dangerous if the insidious of the disease is not treated. So that's what we're doing on the Sunday Project. We're dedicated to, you know, bringing you folk from around the world, as this is a global issue, right? Matt, you shared, you know, it seems like in the UK, they are increasing the want and desire to push and encourage gambling. We're seeing that for sure over here. The immorality is incredible. And Kate, we had a meeting yesterday and you were telling me what you're doing every day. I mean, you're up at 3 a.m. to come here, right? And you've met Matt before, and everybody in this area knows each other. We've got Kim in the house, Kim's in the room, the audience, parents standing together, representing the parents, as she's a parent of a young man who really was in a dire way with his gambling disorder. That link is also in the chat. Please, if you're a parent looking for help, please send that out. But yeah, Kate, you are on the shop floor, going to Parliament, talking to politicians directly to their faces. And some of them you said are on your side. You're working every day in and day out, unfunded, right, to raise awareness about the truth. And I heard you say something that you were so affected by the government turning, or someone like in the sector turning a blind eye to the truth of, like, no, we can't keep advertising at this time of night. We can't advertise directly to children. And you were so affected by something that you heard the other day, that you were noticed by a journalist. A story was then published, and then the Prime Minister did something. Could you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was at Parliament House having a meeting, and I was told, look, I'm just going to be honest, we're not doing anything. We've been instructed not to do anything. And I was just, I broke down. I was just at my wit's end, and I said, I'm on the front line helping people, and I'm unresourced, and you have all the resources in the world, and you're choosing to do nothing. I said, how is that okay? And she just said, look, just all I can say is keep going. You are helping, but I'm sorry right now, like there's nothing I can tell you that we're doing. I don't want to lie to you. We're not doing anything. And she left, and the journalist came over, and he said, what's going on? And I told him what had just happened, and he said, do you want to go on the record? And I said, well, I've got nothing to lose. They're doing nothing, so you might as well. And in one of the meetings that I'd had previously with government officials, they said, it's not us that needs convincing. Can you go and have a meeting with the sporting codes and the gambling companies and the broadcasters and get them on side? And I was like, are you serious? You're expecting somebody with lived experience to convince vested interests to change their mind, to stop preying upon people. Like, even if I could get those meetings, it would be entirely unsafe for me to do so. Um, and I'm like, this is your job. This is your department. Why are we asking vested interests what they think it needs to be done in the space instead of actually regulating the space? And so after that story got published, 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister made an announcement of the reform package, this long-awaited reform package, which was total BS. It was essentially written by a sports betting company for sure, because one thing that with legislation when it's proposed by government, if the industry loses their mind, then they weren't consulted. That means it's actually going to be effective. But if the industry is quiet, then they've either drafted it themselves or consulted with government before anything's been announced. So this was dropped just before Easter, which is in political terms called taking out the trash. It means they'll roll out a policy just before a holiday so that everyone's busy and distracted and there's not much media attention on it. That's how little the government thinks about people harmed by gambling. And it absolutely broke, me in another way. I was trying to pack to take my family away at Easter, and I'm taking journalist calls all day, and I'm thinking, oh, just why can't you actually give people the respect of prioritizing the health and well-being of your citizens like that? It just absolutely does my head in that our government's willing to turn a blind eye to $32 billion being lost out of our households, out of our communities. And that number, I think, is conservative considering it's 3-year-old data. And I don't think it properly captures how all of the ways that gambling is morphed in its various forms. And as far as parents, children are absolutely have been groomed and targeted. Now they're the new market that gambling companies switched from men to then targeting women, and now children are able to access gambling platforms. We're not entirely sure how that process is happening, but it is at a rapid rate. And instead of the industry taking responsibility for it, the tack that they're taking is, well, your child shouldn't be able to access a adult product, so you should get the police involved because they've committed fraud.
And they push it back on the parents, and they push the responsibility back on the parents, right? But it's such a hard-hitting story. And I think that there's a shared emotion in the room of the sound you made of, and that's the frustration. Matt, because you're also in the space of, facing head on these institutions government? Like, do you want to share some of the stuff or your feelings on what Kate just shared?
Yeah, I think what Kate shared is we have a similar issue here, which is I think a lot of the decisions that are made are downstream from an ideology or a kind of uh, approach that wants to grow the gambling industry, wants to kind of facilitate the growth of the gambling industry's profits, and government seeing its part of its role is to do that. Like, and in many sectors, in many contexts, government will see its role as doing that, and that is a reasonable, acceptable position for government to take. But with gambling, it's very, very different. It's a very different type of industry. It's a harms industry. Most of the revenues are coming from people experiencing gambling problems. There's an adversarial relationship between the consumers and the platforms. You know, they need regulation, otherwise people are going to be harmed. I think that it's a misnomer in that respect. And yeah, look, when we got the maximum stake reduced from £100 to £2 on the fixed odds betting terminals, we had a real stars aligning sort of moment where obviously we'd been campaigning for 6 years when we got the decision. And at that point, we had a gambling minister who we had kind of got on side in the last parliament before they became the minister. We had all of the national newspapers on board. We had like over time basically built huge popular support, risen the salience of the issue, of the product, of the problems. And it was just really a kind of like a culmination of all of those efforts, really. And the fact that we had a person in a position of power who could make a decision that her instincts were aligned with ours. And what usually happens is you'll get a gambling minister appointed or someone who's making a decision on this. They won't really have any opinions. They will get completely bombarded by the gambling lobby. The gambling lobby will completely take control of the conversation with the government department. And the government department will treat the gambling lobby like they do any other industry. They will just sort of work very cooperatively with them. They'll feel like their job is to kind of protect the industry in some way. And that's the biggest problem for me. Gambling needs to move from something that we facilitate the growth of as, you know, countries, governments, to something we control and constrain. And and that requires, I think, a shift in kind of priorities.
You
You
know,
know, here in the
we're
States,
go,
NCPG, National Council on Problem Gambling. Last week was Gambling Advocacy Day, and we had an opportunity to be online live with representatives in the government. And we were talking to an assistant. That's who took the calls, who maybe or maybe not going to talk to Senator so and so. And that's the lobby that we have, you know, and it's all about money. But nobody of any responsibility was on the other end of our questions on National Advocacy Day.
yeah, yeah, I was going to say almost the same thing. I spoke last year with the assistant to my congressman, went nowhere. You know, I always believe we're the most unsympathetic addicts, you know, that nobody really cares about that gambling is really a problem, unless in the rare occasion somebody in their family has a really bad gambling problem. Now they want to do something about it. We're going in the opposite direction, especially with prediction markets, because prediction markets are now controlled by the federal government.
Mark,
And
you threw out a number. How much money New York State got from DraftKings last year? What was
yeah, but they're not going to get it. It was like $2 billion because they get, which is really weird. New York was getting 55% of the profit, 55, 5 billions of dollars, of which a little of it was trickle. That's the sick part. Only so little was trickled down to help problem gambling in the state. But now they might not get hardly any of that money because as a prediction market, they won't get the money. They'll only get money from non-prediction market vendors, which is crazy. And then again, there's going to be less money for help. In this country, everything is, unfortunately, Matt, we do things grassroots and it goes nowhere. You know, each little state, maybe the council tries something, but where we have hundreds of people, they have millions of people. You know, they keep stepping it up. We have March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Each state does a little. They do the best they can. We all work hard, but it's like a drop in the bucket. When during March in California, in the United States, I have not seen one vendor have a commercial that says, this is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. This is what problem gambling is about. So nothing's coming from them. The leagues in this country are making a fortune. And I think that that's the biggest problem is the connection between the sports leagues and gambling. Their ticket prices are going up. They're selling merchandise up the roof, and they just keep promoting it. They're using their the teams are using announcers during games to promote gambling. And I don't even think these announcers know what they're doing, that don't realize, when they're saying, oh, yes, and this is something from FanDuel or DraftKings, bet $5, win $200. These are announcers who are calling games. They don't know that it's even, I don't think most people understand that how much harm is being created.
No, I was just thinking, go, Jared. I see you going. Go, Jared.
No, I mean, I think the hardest part to battle this is you're battling money, which is almost impossible. And the only thing I think can beat money is massive people working together, And I mean, even from just like civil rights aspect, like if maybe we didn't try to go, hey, let's ban this, but like, hey, try to get as many people on board of like, hey, we're not going to bet these 2 days and just show the power we have as like a youth. And I think that would put people more on the more on the offense of like, hey, we do need some form of control and change. And even if it's not, hey, stop being able to do this, just can you take live betting off? Or just, smaller things for a couple of days.
And also,
And
one of the people I work with in Los Angeles was a problem gambler, and now he's a licensed social worker helping people. And Jared, your example, and Yiz, who was here last week, it's not just about stopping gambling for yourself. It's about being part of a movement that sees this as a public health crisis. And as someone that is working through a gambling addiction, part of your recovery is helping others see this as a crisis and speaking up. And I'm seeing that willingness happen more and more. People that have contacted me through Stop Betting Sports that like this Sunday program, want to get into social work, want to get into counseling, or those that just want to be advocates on this issue that are struggling with gambling. And, I'm fortunate that I see this on an individual by individual basis. I'm less connected to, all of the moneyed elements with, MLB and the partnership with FanDuel and DraftKings, et cetera. I know that exists, but, people are overcoming gambling addictions. They are helping others like Jared and everyone in this room. So I just want to say that too.
yeah, no, I just wanted to remind everyone what's in the chat. Matt, your website is looking fantastic. Your app is looking beautiful, if I might say. It's in the chat if you want to click on Gamban. How many states is it in now?
So we available everywhere, in every country, but there are free licenses available through Ohio, through timeoutohio.com, through the Michigan Gaming Control Board, through the Louisiana Association on Compulsive Gambling, and we're hoping to add a couple more states as well very soon.
That's right, to make it free in certain states. And then you've mentioned to me, Kate, that you've got it in Australia, that people are using Gamban. It's working well.
Absolutely. It's one of the tools that I point people towards because they feel so unsafe online. And, we only have BetStop here, which is for sports betting, so it doesn't sort of block any other things. And then if you want to self-exclude from land-based gambling, that can be very challenging depending on which state you're in. So, we're really one of the reforms we're pushing for is national regulation, a dedicated minister to address gambling harm rather than it be a fractured thing that's spread out amongst the states or people can point to that's not my responsibility. It is a public health crisis, not just in Australia, but globally, as we were
Globally.
talking about.
I just
Yeah.
want to give a quick shout out to Matt and how adaptable Gambam I think that's why
Yeah.
that's why I think I don't work for them anymore. I kept calling it Gambab. Um, the was the story where, I had a client with a baseball card problem, which one day maybe we'll do a whole uh,
Mm,
thing on
mm,
gambling and that.
yeah.
And he was able, it was a great article in the Times. He was able to get those sites, even sites that other people wouldn't think gambling, but those are certainly some of the worst gambling sites, are things like gambling on opening up sports cards boxes. So I think that's really cool that people that, I've worked with them in so many different ways that they listen to people. And I think that's really cool. I just wanted to say thanks, Matt.
I mean, yeah, Matt, you're free to speak if you need to. I
No,
just,
thanks so much. And we are aware that people can get addicted to lots of things that have gambling-like mechanics and like lots of similarities to gambling. And if you self-exclude from sports betting, that's great. That's a good first step. But there's always a risk that there are displacement activities that you might seek out to try to kind of replicate what you experience with sports betting. So this is why with Gamban, we block everything that is gambling related. And yeah, I think it's really obviously important that when people are in that mode where they want to quit, that they just do as many things as they possibly can to make it difficult for them to gamble again.
it's amazing what you've done, Matt, and I'm so grateful to you, all of you guys, as usual, volunteering your Sunday morning. So grateful to everybody that shows up here on the Sunday Project to listen in. I've had some inquiries about this jacket. If you are interested and you do want one of these, our fellow here, Bob G, is the man, but you can email me and I just want to show you why actually it would be useful if you did purchase this. If you was, it would be a donation to Stop Betting Sports. It has SBS on the back and our QR code. And Bob's actually been to some sporting events, basketball games. He's been into different baseball games, and people are scanning the QR code, and that is raising awareness of who we are and what we do. And the message here, right, is just having a little thing out there in the public to remind people and raise awareness. And so if anyone is interested, please email me. I've put my email in the chat. There are resources in the chat. Please check out all of them. Next week we have Danny Fun, author of Everybody Loses, coming on. We have Louis, I'm going to say his surname wrong. Please help me, Matt. Ruggiero,
Yeah.
who you work with. Matt and Louis and Rob Minnick work together, doing the same thing as Kate, all the way down under. Policy change, big stuff, huge important things happening with guys here in SBS. So yeah, next week. And then I will be hosting a Sunday project. We do have some people in the room today who are working in treatment, who run treatment programs. And I would like some of those folks to come on and talk about how it is to run a treatment program for gambling disorder. So once again, thank you so much for coming. Happy Father's Day. Don't let your dad gamble today because it is Sunday. You do not have to gamble on a Sunday. Again, we are not anti-gambling. We're just saying take a day off from gambling, guys. There are so many things to do, like do your laundry and feel grateful to just enjoy doing laundry. What a blessing. I had that myself when I passed an exam this week. I just did laundry and it was so nice. So thanks again, guys. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. We're here. We are small, but we are very, very strong and loud. Happy Sunday, everyone. See you next week on Stop Betting Sports.
Thanks, Deb.
All right, guys.